B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Thursday, January 11th, 2018. And I'm a little jazzed because last night, Raul Velez, who is the volunteer chief engineer for the Peter B. Collins podcast, paid a visit, and we installed the brand new high-tech mixer board here. And you may be able to hear the difference. I certainly can hear. And I want to thank Raul, who has been so generous to help keep us on the air. And I also want to thank the people who donated extra cash to help pay for this upgrade. And I remember Forbes Johnson, Faith Peoples, and John Zweibel. But they gave the money back in August or September, so if I missed somebody who was generous, please forgive me. Why don't you drop me an email to remind me, and I'll give you a special shout-out. But I lead the podcast in distress today because I want my goddamn Fourth Amendment back. And I'm very serious about this. The erosion of the Bill of Rights since 9/11 is one of the greatest disappointments of my lifetime as an American. And the phrase I just used, give me back my goddamn Fourth Amendment, I have used in blunt face-to-face conversations with Nancy Pelosi, the ranking Democrat in the House, with Mike Thompson, who is a North Bay congressman from here in California and a member of the Intelligence Committee, and I've said it to members of the Senate as well. But they don't appear to be listening to me. They caved into the fear-mongering and to the manipulation of Speaker Paul Ryan. And the vote today to extend the troublesome FISA Section 702 for 6 years without any amendment was passed by a vote of 256 to 164. Haven't had time to look at the vote count and identify people that I want to out about this, but maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Anyway, Section 702 was dismissed by Mike Hayden, the former head of the NSA and the CIA. He's been Mr. Spook for years now. And last year, I heard him in an interview. He was on a book tour. And after the Ed Snowden revelations, he kind of chuckled and he said, well, you know, if you would have told me that all I'd have to give up is a little 702 program, I wouldn't be concerned. And that's the way he put it. A little 702 program. But members of the House of Representatives, and it's unlikely that the Senate will tinker with this bill when it reaches that body, but they decided that spycraft is important and that this Section 702, which allows the interception and the use of wiretapped data, conversations that were picked up through the different methods that they use to monitor Google, Facebook, international telephone calls. And the ruse here is that they claim that the interception of the American conversation is incidental, that they're really targeting this non-American who's outside the United States. But this is a widely abused loophole, and we know it. And what's interesting is that Trump confounded the people in the House and contradicted himself in a series of tweets yesterday about this controversial bill, which, by the way, Nancy Pelosi did ask Ryan to pull from consideration, but I can't say that I consider that to be a very serious move on her part. After all, she was on the Intelligence Committees, and then when she became Speaker, she was part of the Gang of Eight. She was in on all of the secret moves in the intelligence community after 9/11. At any rate, the Trump tweets, as always, first start with a reference to himself. House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of the discredited and phony dossier to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others. Then he put a question mark behind a declarative sentence. I guess in Twitter, grammar is expendable. Then apparently Paul Ryan got on the phone to him and said, hey, you're on the wrong message point there, Donnie. So let's see what I can't see the timestamp here on when the first tweet was sent. But the second one came at 6 a.m. while he was watching Fox and Friends. With that being said, I have personally directed the fix to the unmasking process since taking office. And today's vote is about foreign surveillance of foreign bad guys on foreign land. We need it. Get smart. What a fool that man is. And a shameless bullshitter. Now let's look at the state of censorship and surveillance around the world today. Vice News, in an unusually lengthy report online today, covers the case of a Palestinian man, Abd al-Salam Jihad al-Masri. And he apparently went into Israel without the right papers. And then they discovered his Facebook posts. And he now, based on the military law and the military courts that have an almost 100% conviction rate, he's languishing in an Israeli jail, accused of incitement. Now, his Facebook posts, which have now been disclosed, one honored his martyred cousin, a Hamas terrorist who carried out a bombing of a Sbarro pizza restaurant that killed 15 people. Another post expressed a young man's frustrations and anger over Palestinians' dwindling control of Jerusalem. And a third showed a stock picture of a handgun, declared that some unspecified people learn respect only through violence. Now, I don't know what free speech rights Israelis enjoy, but whatever they are, Palestinians enjoy fewer free speech rights. And according to Goddam, executive director of the Arab Center for the Advancement of Social Media, there are just a few cases concerning incitement by Jewish Israelis and hundreds on the other side. It's about silencing voices that are critical. And Fadi Khouri, an attorney for a Palestinian legal aid group, says in the past 5 to 6 years we've seen more arrests from speech on Facebook or social media in general. And in September of 2016, Facebook and the Israeli government announced they had reached an agreement to monitor incitement on Facebook. And a few months later, the state attorney's office revealed in its 2016 annual report that it had requested the removal of 2,241 posts and that 91% of them were identified as inciting terror or violence, and 70% of the total were removed in violation of Israeli free speech protections. Also, in neighboring Egypt, the military dictatorship embraced by the United States and aided into office by Obama, President al-Sisi's government has been among the worst offenders, repeatedly arresting political activists for posts on Facebook. So then we turn to Glenn Greenwald's latest post, and you know Glenn lives in Brazil, in Rio, and he is, certainly paying attention to what's going on in Brazil, but also in France. And in a post dated January 10th at The Intercept, Greenwald notes that the federal police of Brazil, the equivalent of the FBI, have announced that they are going to be cracking down on fake news. And it's not limited to commentary on social media. It basically includes all websites, all internet activity. So Greenwald is appropriately alarmed about this, and he notes the parallel to what's going on in France under the new Prime Minister Macron. And in both cases, they are claiming that because of fake news and because of unproven election meddling, particularly in France, and there's no indication that anybody's attempted to meddle in the messy elections in Brazil, but they are using the pretext of terrorism and fake news and hacked elections to censor unpopular speech. And this is a very, very troubling development. Take a look at Greenwald's article, as always. He does a very fine job of analyzing the issues that he presents. And, of course, 9/11 is the pretext for all of this stuff. It also was the pretext for setting up America's own gulag on the tip of the island of Cuba. And it was 11 years ago today that the first prisoners were dispatched and fed methlaquone, the anti-malarial drug that there was no indication of a need for, that has known psychotic side effects. And I want to commend the British activist and journalist Andy Worthington, because he is the longest, most persistent and consistent campaigner against the brutality of America's detention center at Gitmo. And he is in Washington, D.C. today protesting at the White House. And I think Andy is a great human being. And I appreciate that while other people, especially Americans, have kind of moved on and forgotten about Guantanamo, he has not let go. Now, there's a new lawsuit brought by, I believe, 11 of the prisoners at Guantanamo. Many of them have been there at least 10 years, some 15 years. There are a total of 41 men remaining at Guantanamo. And this new lawsuit says that they're challenging their detention on the grounds that Trump's defiant pledge to keep all remaining detainees permanently locked up is fueled by his hostility toward Muslims. And the petitioners quote medical experts who've compared the prolonged indefinite imprisonment at Guantanamo to sensory deprivation and psychological torture. Prisoners are medicated for depression and anxiety brought on by acute despair. And I want to note that today I recorded an interview with a man who sits on death row just down the road from me at San Quentin Prison here in California. His name is William A. Noguera, and he's published a fascinating new memoir. And we'll get the interview out to you early next week. It needs some editing. And he really impressed me as a man who understands the emotions and the despair that come with an open-ended prison sentence, particularly one that has a likely end in execution. So we will see where these lawsuits go, but there's no appetite in Washington. We don't have any Democrats who really champion the human rights of the people detained at Guantanamo or even recognize the continuing recruitment poster that it represents for people who have some bias toward the United States and look for evidence to support that. Julian Assange, I mentioned yesterday, is kind of getting a gentle boot from Ecuador, trying to end his 5-year residency at their embassy in London. And in a surprise move today, the nation of Ecuador granted citizenship to Julian Assange. Now, I don't know that that particularly fixes anything, because Assange is still threatened with arrest by Britain for breaking bail. And I don't know if they can give him temporary diplomatic status, therefore diplomatic immunity, long enough to get him to Heathrow and on a jet to Ecuador, or some other nation that might accept him and give him asylum. Now, Ecuador does have an extradition treaty with the United States, but there are loopholes that allow people wanted for political offenses to dodge extradition. So we will continue to watch the progress of Julian Assange, Mr. Transparency.
This is a historic act of devastating incompetence.
Every day I like to pause for a minute and thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I want to thank Bill Hale, who is a listener, local guy here in Marin County, who offered me an interesting tip that he picked up from On the Media, which is an NPR program. And he said, you know, Peter, you should try this tactic to get people to subscribe to your podcast. He said he heard this on the Media, where Brooke Gladstone, the host, invited people to support their work with subscriptions or a contribution. And then, knowing that her listeners are all listening to podcasts, she tells her listeners to pause the show and do it now. Make your contribution and then restart the podcast. Well, I'm willing to try anything to get more people to support my work and to help pay the freight here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. So let me invite you to pause the podcast right now as I thank Arlene Montemarano, Benny Alto, Jason Spitzer, and Aidan McAleer for their ongoing support. And all you have to do is go to peterbcollins.com. No matter what device you use, there's a menu button. You click on it, then click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page. You got easy choices of $5, $10, $20 a month. There's a $1 24-hour pass. There's a $50 annual subscription. Something is likely to fit your fancy and your monetary capabilities, and I hope you will take action like that. I'd really appreciate it. So last year, Trump told reporters in June that he is 100% willing to give a sworn statement to special counsel Bob Mueller. But yesterday, the flip-flopper with the massive comb-over declined to commit to being interviewed by Mueller. I'll speak to attorneys, Trump said after he was questioned about it at an event with the Prime Minister of Norway. We'll see what happens. But the Democrats are keeping up pressure on their scenario with the new report that they issued, which is full of generalities and claims about Russian interference going back almost 100 years. And I don't know that it has any real significance. I have only read news accounts of it, but it just seems to offer circumstantial arguments about why we should believe that Russia interfered in our election last year. Then there are the Republicans who are saying, well, you know, the fix was in. This was a way of discrediting Trump. This is a hangover from the Clinton campaign. And Trump was commenting yesterday, said for 11 months, they've had this phony cloud over the administration, over our government, and it's hurt our government. It's a Democrat hoax that was brought up as an excuse for losing an election. Now, I know that doesn't sit well with a lot of progressives, a lot of Hillary fans, and people who just want Trump out of office. But I want to recommend a new column at consortiumnews.com by my friend Ray McGovern. Ray served for many years at the CIA. He was a Russia specialist. He gave the daily briefing to Reagan for a number of years in the 1980s. And he writes, Russiagate is becoming FBI-gate, thanks to the official release of unguarded text messages between loose-lipped FBI counterintelligence official Peter Strzok and his garrulous girlfriend, FBI lawyer Lisa Page. Now, Ray does have a way with words. He goes on, despite his former job as chief of the FBI's counterintelligence section, Strzok had the naive notion that texting on FBI phones could not be traced. And he told his girlfriend, he's married, by the way, that Page, Lisa Page, that these conversations, these text exchanges, wouldn't be intercepted. And McGovern says we suddenly have documentary proof that key elements of the U.S. intelligence community were trying to short-circuit the U.S. democratic process. It now appears that it was not the Russians trying to rig the outcome of the U.S. election, but leading officials of the U.S. intelligence community, shadowy characters sometimes called the deep state. And he also says that this is likely what led to the early retirement of FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Some of the text messages reference a meeting in McCabe's office where the term insurance plan came up, insurance policy, and McGovern and others interpret that to mean that the whole Russia narrative was a way to either keep Trump from winning the election and taking office. And by the way, I never acknowledged that he won, simply that he was named the winner. There is a difference. And McGovern continues, as the FBI's chief of counterespionage during the investigation into Clinton's unauthorized use of personal email for classified information, Strzok reportedly changed the words grossly negligent, which could have triggered legal prosecution, to the far less serious extremely careless in FBI Director James Comey's depiction of Clinton's actions. And then, as Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division, Strzok led the FBI's investigation into alleged Russian interference in the U.S. election. Then this August 2016 meeting in McCabe's office, and Strzok wrote to Page, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy. In the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Now, that's not conclusive. But there's actual public evidence. These text messages have been released. There is no public evidence to support the Russia hacked the DNC and gave that to WikiLeaks in order to cause Hillary to lose. And you'll probably notice that most of the media promoters of the meme have kind of moved on. They're talking about corruption, obstruction of justice, and the mental state of the occupant of the Oval Office. One of America's wealthiest families, the Waltons, have become even more wealthy as a result of the Trump tax cuts. And their little mom-and-pop shop, Walmart, has announced that the money the tax reform delivers to them is going to be partly used to increase wages. The starting wage will jump $2 from $9 to $11 an hour. There will be one-time cash bonuses of up to $1,000 to hourly workers, depending on how long they've been with the company. They plan to expand maternity parental leave policies to give full-time hourly employees 10 weeks of maternity leave, 6 weeks of parental leave. Now, I'm happy to see this. Maybe people who work at Walmart will no longer have to sign up for food stamps and Medicaid to survive on the substandard wages that are paid by what is America's largest brick-and-mortar retailer. But oh, Marie Antoinette would love this. After making his rich patrons and buddies and cronies even richer, the Trump boy has announced that they are going to allow, I believe, 10 states to run test programs requiring work for people who receive Medicaid. And this is all framed around lofty doublespeak about how it's good for these people to make them work. The head of this program, the SNAP program, whose name is Verma, let me get her first name here, Seema Verma, administrator of the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. She invoked some of the lofty language of George W. Bush. Listen to this. Believing that community engagement requirements do not support or promote the objectives of Medicaid is a tragic example of the soft bigotry of low expectations consistently espoused by the prior administration. Those days are over, she says. Well, this is just cruel, because anybody on Medicaid who's able to work would rather work than just sit at home. But many of these people are on Medicaid because they are so ill that they cannot work, or the work they used to do made them ill. And so we hear the, happy talk that researchers have found strong evidence that unemployment is harmful to health and employment tends to improve general mental health. And a Gallup poll showed that unemployed Americans are more than twice as likely as those with full-time jobs to say that they have or are being treated for depression. All right, well, let's move them from depressed to despondent by telling them that we're going to take away their measly Medicaid benefits unless they can go out and find a job somewhere. A federal judge has ruled in favor of Trump's decision to install Mick Mulvaney in a second job. Mulvaney is the budget director, and they also have him doing double duty as the interim director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This came out of Dodd-Frank, was set up by Elizabeth Warren, and it was on its way to do some good work when Mulvaney went over there to basically dismantle and impede the mission of the agency. And when the previous director, Richard Cordray, stepped down in November, he felt that the law that created the CFPB was clear and that it overrode the Presidential Vacancy Act, or whatever that's called. But the judge ruled in the other direction, saying that Trump does have the authority and that Mulvaney will stay for now. Cheers to the Green Mountain State. That's where my grandfather was born. Vermont's Senate yesterday approved a bill legalizing limited adult consumption and home cultivation of marijuana. Now, I don't think Vermont is the perfect state to grow those Green Mountain buds. Summers are too short there. I used to spend summers there when I was a kid. And the law does not permit retail sales. But it does decriminalize adult use and home cultivation. They'll need grow lights. It's a hydroponic kind of state. And New Hampshire is considering a similar move. All the other states that have legalized weed did it through initiatives. So it's interesting to see a legislature take on the Neanderthal Jeff Sessions. You may have heard rumblings this week that a lot of women were threatening to boycott Harper's Magazine and asking writers who have articles in the pipeline at Harper's to withdraw them. Why? Because Harper's is about to publish a story about a list that was created by a woman who was unknown until she identified herself yesterday. She created the list called Shitty Media Men, and it listed 70 men in the industry, along with allegations ranging from questionable behavior to rape. And Katie Royf, the author of the cover story on Harper's that nobody has seen yet, said, look, I was not going to name this individual unless she authorized it. But Moira Donegan came forward yesterday, and she published an essay, I started the Media Men list, my name is Moira Donegan. She said she was the person who first collected a range of rumors and allegations. It's a dossier. It's opposition research. And that it has grown and that she is no longer in complete control of it, so she can't say that every name on the list is accurate. But one activist had offered to pay writers who withdrew stories from Harper's, and she had identified people who were willing to accept about $19,000 from her in order to pull their stories from Harper's. And maybe that will not be necessary now. The latest accused sex offender in Hollywood also may get a minor charge of hypocrisy. Actor and director James Franco appeared at the Golden Globe Awards sporting a Time's Up pin. And subsequently, 5 women have declared that his time is up. And they include Violet Paley, age 23. She was riding with him in a car, she says, and all of a sudden his penis was out. I got really nervous, and I said, can we do this later? He was kind of nudging my head down, and I didn't just want him to hate me, so I did it. And Paley said later she continued a sexual relationship with Franco. Now, it's hard for me to judge from here what kind of a relationship they had when he asked her to blow him while he was driving. But she's not alone. Former actress Ali Sheedy tweeted, James Franco just won, referring to the Golden Globes. Please never ask me why I left the film TV business. And here's another tweet. Hey, James Franco, nice Time's Up pin at the Golden Globes. Remember a few weeks ago when you told me the full nudity you had me do in 2 of your movies for $100 a day wasn't exploitive because I signed a contract to do it? Time's up on that. Now, this is a wobbler to me. We weren't there. I don't know what the discussions were. I don't know when this woman decided she wanted to work and accepted those terms. And I don't know just how gross he was in the way he directed her to do this. But once again, I'm uncomfortable with this whole public lynching of people based simply on accusations. Now, in the Show Me state of Missouri, the current governor, a Republican and former Democrat, and a Rhodes Scholar and former Navy SEAL, whose name is Greitens, Eric Greitens, yesterday he gave his State of the State message, and then he acknowledged that he had been having an affair a couple of years ago, and the ex-husband of his mistress, in this case, has released an audio tape of a recording that he made with his former wife back in 2015. And this reveals that the now governor, he wasn't elected at the time, apparently had sex with this woman at his house and then took her to the basement and it's unclear exactly whether she was clothed or not, but it's described as an attempt to capture a photo that could be used to blackmail her. So I presume it was sexual in nature, I just don't know. And he apparently took the picture. She was blindfolded and partly tied up, or at least restrained at the time. So it is kind of bizarre. And the wife of the governor has come forward. She's an assistant professor of political science at Mizzou. Her name is Sheena Greitens. We have a loving marriage and an awesome family. Anything beyond that is between us and God. I want the media and those who wish to peddle gossip to stay away from me and my children. And finally today, I want to tell a little story that was triggered by this news account that a retired Japanese crime boss who'd been on the lam for 14 years was arrested in Thailand after photos of his full body tattoos and a missing little finger went viral. Now, this is a former leader of the crime syndicate in Japan called Yakuza. And apparently he was playing chess or checkers, was shirtless. It's hot in Thailand. And a picture was taken of his full body tattoo. So in 1987, I was on a long tour of Asia. And in Kyoto, Japan, which is a city that has no street markings, I got lost. I had instructions on how to find a certain restaurant from the innkeeper where I was staying. And so I approached this building that kind of looked like a residential hotel or a men's club. And I go in and there's a guy sitting at the door. And I say, hey, where's the restaurant Yoshimura? In some kind of pidgin Japanese. And he looks at me clueless and, doesn't even say a word. And then I kind of look around the room, and there are a lot of guys sitting there reading the paper, smoking cigarettes, and talking to each other. And suddenly, from the back of this lobby, a curtain is pulled aside, and a very large man emerges, and he is tattooed and shirtless from the waist up. Let me say that again. He was tattooed from the waist up, and he was shirtless. And so he spoke a little English, and he gave me directions to the restaurant Yoshimura. And then again in pidgin Japanese, I said to him, this place, what is it? And he got this devilish grin on his face, and he said, Yakuza. And then to make sure I understood what he was saying, he said, we are mafia. So I had stumbled into the Kyoto headquarters of Yakuza, and I beat a very hasty retreat. Glad I'm here to tell you that story today. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It appears on YouTube when all the clicks work. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.